In previous sections of our class, I have gone through some really the critical concepts of innovation metrics, strategic planning, and change planning. And I thought from a point of example, I would run through a strategic plan that actually happened in the past. So what I'll do is go through the 10-3-1, the 10-year, 3-year, 1-year conceptual strategic plan. I'll go through it as it existed back in the mid-90s, but because it's an old strategic plan, it'll give us the opportunity to look backwards to see, well, what was it about the plan that worked and what didn't work? Were our predictions correct? So I thought this would be an interesting way to give you an example of how to deal with, writing your own 10-3-1 plan for your organization. So what I'm basically presenting to you right now is a deck, a long presentation. We'll get in later sections. We'll get into how to do executive summaries. But this was when I was in the mid '90s responsible for changing the learning and development strategy in relationship to the basically the internet being introduced into our business. So when I had to kind of take a look at transforming the organization and looking into the future, so when I sat down with my senior management, and again, my group was called Learning and Development, consider it to be the national organization for the training and development group at the company I was a part of. So this would be my objectives for the meeting with senior management. It was really to present our aspiration for the organization, a strategic and tactical overview of our role in supporting business units and meeting their goals, and to share our preliminary one-year plan and actions to support key strategies in the business, and to have some agreement on next steps. So what I have here is the basic structure of what a 10-3-1 would look like, an aspiration plan. We started to think through what were the main issues that we would need to understand and deal with as we started to scenario plan for the future. We thought that there would be some major change in the areas of what the workforce would look like, what management systems would need to be in place, how we thought at the time technology would evolve, organizational structures, and also the products and services, whether it be of the organization at large or our own. And you can see here what the process, the strategic process looks like. So you start with your 10, which is painting a general picture of, in our case, this was the future learning environment, but it would be in somebody else's case, it could be whatever environment you were a part of. Once we get that picture out there, then we could sort of paint a picture of the role that we might play in that future. How do we become relevant in that future? And then define the core capabilities that we would need to be a part of the future. So as you start to scenario plan what the future might look like, you have to think about the core things that you must excel at to succeed in that predicted future. Then you would break the core capabilities into the processes within the organization and the competencies that would be required by employees. We would develop our measures of progress toward building those capabilities, state where we needed to be within 3 years along those measures, look at and discuss any gaps and barriers to achieving those core capabilities, establish a 3-year plan with action steps, and then talk about the one. So this pretty much should show you in practice what happens with the past topics that we covered in terms of innovation metrics and how we use them, strategic planning, and then down the road we'll get in more deeply into the change plan. So in our brainstorm, and this slide captures really days of work. So for example, when we look at our products and services, we predicted what might the future look like. So we thought maybe down the road, multiple products would be cross-sold to corporate and consumer clients alike. So our organization, our company, sold transaction and IT type services into. We had a retail consumer division and we had a corporate division. So who knew where that might end up? So that's an example. So around technology, we did not have common platforms in the mid 90s. So, we as it started to build this common platform, right around that time, we started to think about how we could use that, to cut across the organization. We played with the idea of distance learning, which is so commonplace nowadays. It's crazy. But at the time, this was new thinking. So that was something that we expected, that online learning would become a part of the future. We suspected that management in a new, diverse workforce would need to have a far more complex set of skills. And we thought about what the new workforce would look like. We assumed it was going to get more and more diversified. We had some ideas that possibly the ideas of career development would start to shift to more of an idea around employability. As it turns out, that was probably true. You see more and more folks going gig to gig in employment, as opposed to having more of a focus on career development within a company, or specifically having job security within a company. That seems to have played out. We were thinking that we would probably have alliances with outside institutions to prepare our workforce in terms of training and development and what have you. While we predicted that might have been academic institutions, we found that there have been more of a move towards vendor management when it comes to providing the services that we were providing at the time. So you can sort of see, and of course we predicted that change management would become more embedded in our processes than just be a concept that was sort of the flavor of the month, if you will. So this basically illustrates how we did our scenario planning and came up with some concepts that we thought would be true in the distant future. Some of these things played out. We guessed right. Some of these things we maybe were a little off on, right? But that's okay, because who knows what's going to happen 10 years down the road. So moving from there, from that initial thinking around what the future might look like, we did come up with our aspiration statement. And, here we came up with this, that as a business partner, we would provide indisputable value in building and sustaining the world's most respected workforce and work processes through world-class management and development of human assets. So it's good to have something like that in the forefront of your mind to say this is what we're moving towards. I have to tell you that, we were, as we started to talk about world's most respected, which is very hard to figure out who is the world's most respected when you're a staff group inside one company. But I have to say, as we played this out and we played our strategy through, we started to get invited to conferences, and I got to present in other companies at their own, at their sales meetings and whatever, because we were being identified as a group that was pushing the envelope, if you will. So it's nice to have this kind of an aspiration statement in your mind. So one thing that's really kind of important too is to kind of paint a picture of where you're coming from, where you are, and where you're going. So we came from an environment in the early 90s, and this dates back, well before this time frame, where much of what training groups did was very activity driven, meaning certain things were done because they were always done. Things like hiring and training and compensation programs and workflow. These were generally separate organizations, extremely fragmented. Very rarely did you see a relationship between the training department or the folks overseeing performance management from the evaluation perspective and from the goal perspective and from the incentive perspective. So it was an environment that was very fragmented, reactive, not very systematic, and really not tied into priorities of businesses. So, compensation programs, for example, while they were somehow tied to things like incentives for sales or things like that, were they really tied part of the strategic planning process? And that's a real question mark. Was hiring done in a way that connected specific competencies and skills to specific goals? At that point, the answer would certainly be no. And we've made some tremendous progress in general in this mode. What was happening at the time was we were moving towards this idea of utilities. There was this service delivery, circles of excellence might be a way to look at it. In the HR world, there was this, and actually in other functions too. IT did the same thing. Finance organizations did the same thing, where they would set up a point person to be the role, if you could, the relationship leader, account manager, to work directly with business clients, much like an account manager would do outside, with outside sales. And there would be circles of excellence, such as in the HR world, it could be sourcing or training and development or rewards and recognition or employee relations. And the relationship leaders would have access to these circles of excellence and ultimately put together a plan for deployment, whether it be, across the whole company or whether it be, in just for a targeted business. So that was the relationship leader's job. And so when we looked at what were the success factors in each one of those areas, for the relationship leader, it was understanding the business case and starting to move down the path of shared accountability and co-leadership with business results. On the utility side, we became the subject matters, if you will, best practices clearinghouse was the way we referred to it. And on the deployment end, we would be judged based on how we helped drive business results, our alignment with company strategy. So this is what was happening in sort of the mid-90s. Our prediction was that the future learning environment would be less focused on the HR organization and more line management focused, where line managers would actually now have the competency of aligning the people management part of their business. So, they would go through their own strategic planning, assessing their employee or their customer or their shareholder goals, develop, success measures, take a look at process issues, define accountabilities and performance standards. And once they have done that, start to align the acquisition of people in relationship to those goals and standards, how you develop people, how you assess people, how you reward and recognize people. So all of those things would be more connected to the overall business planning process. That was our prediction. And with that, at the end of that, there would obviously be the feedback loop that would talk about, well, did we get our results? Were our plan successful? Have our employees become more motivated, more productive, more satisfied? And are we continuing to put in change to keep up to date with future goals and keeping our company more and more relevant? This was our prediction, that HR would get less and less emphasized from a headcount perspective, and it would be more about developing management skills and leadership skills within line organizations. This has sort of evolved down this path in some ways. We don't know if this exactly happened. In some organizations, this may be more evolved than in other places. I do see many organizations still using that best practice utility model. Oftentimes that is outsourced. So it could be, even though we thought this was going to happen within 10 years, that this idea, if it will happen at all, it probably would have taken us more than 10 years in the general business sense. So then we sort of, in summary, would show what we saw the environment moving towards, from disconnected activities to sequencing activities in a logical way, to ultimately becoming, how do we create the best of all human asset management processes and embed learning into our day-to-day activities. This is how we saw evolution of learning. So also the business planning process where we were at Amex, we had our current system, which was our aspiration planning process, our strategic quality plan, which would, for this purpose, would be the 3-year plan, and then the 1-year goals, and then the performance measures. That sort of was evolving in a very disciplined way, at our organization. Simultaneously, when from my perspective, in our plan, in the learning and development plan, we were saying there's other things that need to happen as well, such as individual capabilities, behavior changes, given where we needed to move from one way of doing business to another, the kinds of knowledge that people needed to have. So in a way, our vision of the future was that learning goals would become incorporated into business goals. Again, I think some of this worked out. I think some of this became true. Maybe it's not completely evolved. So, 10 years, looking at this as a 10-year plan might have been a tad aggressive, but certainly the things seem to be moving in that direction. So, and then, as we have discussed in previous sections, is, well, what is now, given all this, what's the from to? When we start to think tactically now, what are the changes that we see? So from a misalignment of resources, for example, to more clarity and accountability. Technology, frankly, from a training perspective, when this all started, there was no approach to technology whatsoever. And our thought was we'd move to more of a library of options for just-in-time learning, which I think is probably, in retrospect, probably true. That probably occurred. From limited reporting to the ability to report all learning activities with consequential impact, clearly you have seen moves where training organizations are held accountable for, driving business results. From trainers being part of, reacting when new products would come out and they would do just basically product training. The training designers of the future actually needed to be part of the product development cycle. And you can see all of these, this idea of the from to really started to play out. What are we leaving behind us, and what are we moving towards? So from the from to analysis, then you get into the next phase of that, which is, well, what do we need to be good at to excel, to succeed in the future? And, from all of that, we came up with our 5 core capabilities. In our case, it was consultation, leading the learning organization, deploying business solutions, management development from information systems, and skill gap analysis. I'll get more deeply into these pretty soon. So that's going to move us down to the next phase of what do we mean by these processes and competencies. So if we took skill gap analysis as an example, and we played skill gap analysis into what we mean by that, so the identify business needs, identify skills, apply appropriate skill assessment tools, analyze results, and prepare a plan. So, and then beneath that, we have identified, so we have the process defined, then we have the competencies required in each one of those part of those processes. So, for example, underneath identifying business skills, 2 critical competencies would be strategic and conceptual thinking and communication skills. Underneath identifying skills needed to address needs. Under there, we also had strategic, conceptual, and benchmarking methodology. So as you see, this is what we call a capability. It's taking the capability of skill gap analysis, understanding what we mean from a process perspective, and then understanding the competencies required in each one of those cases. As you can see, we did the same thing here for consultation. For example, analyzing and providing value-added employee and customer information that required knowledge of employee, workforce, and customer technological trends, as an example. So you can see the same exact process. Consultation is the capability, the process, and here are the competencies under each step of the process. Deploy business solutions, same thing. We talked about each step of the process and each of the competencies required. All right, and here's for management development, information systems. As you can see, measurement systems design became important, data management, data manipulation. So those were things that didn't exist up until that point in our group, and those needed to be built in our 3-year plan. Leading a learning organization, which it was, as you can see here, it's really developing a vision of what the learning organization needed to look like, a business strategy, align goals really within the company. We needed to figure out ways to match reward and recognition to business goals and strategies. We needed to get very, very rigorous around individual and organizational development plans, and those plans needed to be integrated into the performance management system. And then, of course, evaluate and reinforce learning wherever possible. And here are the skills that were required, to pull these off, the competencies. So once we got the capabilities defined, then it was a matter of developing the measures of progress and state where how we were going to progress along the 3-year plan. So we identified for each capability the primary competencies that needed to be developed. And so you can see, for example, for skill gap analysis, these were the 3 that seemed to be the most important in terms of our 3-year plan. And then we came up with what we believed would be ways to look at measuring those things from a metric perspective, then where we are at a point in time currently, and then what our 3-year target would look like. So for each capability, we put one of these plans in place. So for consultation, same thing, where we are versus where we're going. We prioritized the main skills, the main competencies for consultation capability. Same thing for deploying business solutions, as you can see there. We also did one for leading a learning organization. And then we did the same thing for management development information systems. So that's a pretty important part. And once you set that up, then you need to discuss the gaps and barriers that might be in place to achieve those core capabilities. So in this case, we identified, given our current state of affairs, what were the barriers to success. And these are things that need to be dealt with. Again, using the technology as an example, inconsistent internal technology platforms. I mean, the whole thing was just all over the place. Supplier agreements all over the place. From an internal alliance perspective, there were multiple training organizations all over the place that didn't have much alignment. So that was sort of weird how that was playing out. From an employee perspective, the learning process was not integrated into employee practices. There was a lot of change that needed to happen, for this initiative to work. So, and then we brought it down to the 1-year plan. What were the initiatives that we would take, in year number 1 to move us through our capabilities? So here, in terms of our strategic expansion, we started with what we called our 3-year operating plan. In this case, we came up with 3 sort of taglines for what the 3-year plan would look like. So this would, in our case, it was improve operating efficiency, redefine and reposition service provider relationships and effectiveness, us being the service provider to our business, and then building the winning culture in our own organization to create a leadership role for us. And then you can see underneath improve operating efficiency. That included things like process reengineering, reporting, and building correct alliances. For repositioning ourselves, it was really looking at the employee development process in a more profound way, being a part of the product development cycle, focusing on building technological ways of doing just-in-time training, and to really create an organization that would be efficient in deploying solutions to our business partners in a quick way, and then energizing the learning and development organization. So from there, we took each one of those banners, if you will, so here underneath improve operating efficiency and our 3 priority areas, then we created for each one of those priority areas our 1-year goals. So if you see over here on the right-hand side, underneath process reengineering, we had create and deploy continuous improvement process for L&D products and services. That didn't exist. We needed to manage resources, so that was creating our own little utilities to do things like Big Board, which was our term for our metric system, learning tracks, which was our term for the developmental process for our line colleagues, integrating the design of training into business practices. So these were examples of all of the things that we needed to focus on in the short term to achieve our 3-year goals, which in this case improve operating efficiency being one, which ultimately would lead to us building our core capabilities and meet our aspiration. So you can see here under redefine and reposition service provider relationships and effectiveness, we did the same thing. We came up with our 1-year goals, and then we did the same thing for building a winning culture. So there was a lot that was going on at the time. Again, as I said before, some of what we predicted worked out. Some of it, we were a little aggressive on it. Clearly, improving cost effectiveness is something that we did. It did occur very well. We certainly were able to increase corporate-wide access to our work. That was something that we did incredibly well through our technology advancements, and the just-in-time training was certainly there. Nowadays this seems like all commonplace to you all because you grew up in this environment. But this is something, again, that we had to build from really point zero, and then somehow the investments that we needed to make, to pull that off, we needed to get, senior management, to support our strategies. And I must say they were very supportive of us because they saw that we continued to make some tremendous strides, as I mentioned in some of the previous segments. So I hope that was useful for you as a way, as you're putting together your own 1031s for your assignments. Again, if you have any questions, just feel free to contact me directly. And, thanks for spending time with me on this. I'm going to get to more parts of aspiration planning in the next segment.